to buff champions now. Before, they would balance solely around nerfs, and weak champions would go untouched for a ridiculously long time. But now when a champion is weak, it's nice to know that there is some fair assumption that they might be buffed within the coming months, or in the case of champions who have a kit that is much more difficult or basically impossible to balance, receive a rework in the next few upcoming months. As we count down the list, we'll be measuring these champions by how underpowered these champions are, how unpopular they have been in both solo queue and competitive play, and how much they deserve the boost to find their way back into relevance. Let's get started. Number 10 is Nunu. Ever since Cinderhulk got nerfed, Nunu has completely fallen out of the meta, and without any significant changes, his win rate dropped by around 5% or so in solo queue, due to the nerfs to Cinderhulk. Now Nunu struggles to find a solid role in this meta and isn't strong enough to be a good jungler anymore, and doesn't bring enough options to be a good support, so he's kind of stuck in a spot right now where he really doesn't fit anywhere, and even though his kit might not be that weak, it lacks purpose and synergy, and because of that, he's fallen out of the meta entirely. Number 9 is Akali. Unfortunately, it seems that Akali's nerf from the past struck her a bit too hard, and because of that, she's become a completely dead champion. And I really miss Akali. I think her kit was a little bit more fair than a lot of the other assassins, and that her escape was a lot easier to outplay than someone like Zed or Echo, who can just press a button and jump out. And sure, I get that a lot of people don't like playing against assassins, but Akali wasn't just nerfed. The fluidity and intuition of her kit were completely gutted, and she became super clunky to play, and that's really all she needs back, and she'll be in a fair spot most likely. She doesn't need any more damage or anything like that. Number 8 is Quinn. Although she might not necessarily need a buff as much as some of the other champions on this list, she definitely deserves it a little bit more than most, since she's been completely underplayed and really unnoticed ever since her release. She's never really been a relevant meta option at all for as long as I can remember, since her kit is quite similar to how Nunu's is right now, in that it really just lacks purpose. She doesn't have the tools to be a good AD carry, and she doesn't have a good enough escape to be a prominent assassin, and so she's left with not too many options at all when she's played. She's only ever popped out here and there as a crazy off-meta pick in competitive play, and has been quite unpopular in solo queue for a long time. Number 7 is Zilean. Although Zilean used to be an incredibly dominant pick for a while about a year and a half ago, after his passive was gutted, his eventual rework to follow it up resulted in a kit that was clunky, difficult to use, and didn't have too many reliable strengths other than his ultimate. Zilean has such a cool and unique kit, and when he's played in a game it creates a really interesting gameplay dynamic for fights, and he's a really funny and charismatic character that I miss quite a lot. Riot tried to make his kit a bit more fair in making his Q a skill shot, which sure was definitely a reasonable choice, but it left him with too many downsides, and he's been unpopular and quite underpowered ever since his rework. Number 6 is Dr. Mundo. In a game where tanks tend to have a lot of success, since the playstyle of a tank is generally easy to play, it's fairly surprising to me to see Dr. Mundo have so much trouble. But it's honestly just because he is quite underpowered right now. For a tank, his win rate in solo queue is actually insanely low. Most tanks have honestly good win rates, or at least win rates that aren't that low, because a tanky champion tends to be more forgiving and a little bit easier to play. But right now Mundo's laning is super weak due to his poor sustain and high health costs on his abilities, that he really struggles to be able to succeed, and has been out of the meta long enough to deserve a small boost to find his way back into the spotlight. Number 5 is Urgot. Whether he deserves a buff or a rework, it's hard to say, and I'd certainly lean towards him deserving a rework a little bit more than just a buff, but he was so ridiculously underpowered for such a long time, and after receiving a couple buffs a while back, he was in the meta for a couple months, but then fell out of the meta again, and throughout the whole time, never really saw success in solo queue. He definitely has the tools a champion would want to be powerful and has more than enough mechanics to be successful. He just needs a little bit better numbers to be able to have more of an impact throughout the game. It wouldn't take much at all to bring Urgot back, but he's had terrible solo queue win rates for almost 3 years now, so he does deserve to gain some power at least when played in the hands of an average player, rather than at the competitive level for sure. Number 4 is Fiddlesticks. He's a champion on this list who deserves the buff a lot more than anyone, even though he doesn't necessarily need the buff that badly. When Runeglaive replaced the Magus jungle enchant, it was great for most of the AP junglers. Everyone had success with it. Well, everyone except for Fiddlesticks, who was left totally in the dust and has struggled ever since. Runeglaive is just not a very good item on someone like him who is a ranged AP jungler, and Fiddlesticks is a champion that has such a unique jungle style in being one of the only squishy junglers to ever find success in competitive play and in major team comps with the playstyle that his ultimate brings. And he used to be very strong in solo queue, but without really being overpowered or unfair, just that he could outplay you easily if your team didn't have any vision. Sure, maybe he can be a little bit unfair with the Zhonya's, but that's more a fault of Zhonya's being a crazy item rather than Fiddlesticks having an unfair kit, and it sucks to see him just get wrecked because of the removal of Magus without any compensation for him at all. Number 3 is Taric. He's a guy who used to be a really awesome support champion, and I personally miss having Taric in the meta quite a lot. Taric is a champion that is really good to exist in the game because he's super easy to play and was one of, if not the best champion to learn support with in the past when he was a relevant option. And being able to play that role in the game goes a long way, and I think Taric did it better than any other support in the game due to his tankiness, sustain, and lack of skill shots. His completely linear kit makes him really easy to play against right now, and the low range on his W and ultimate makes the abilities potentially difficult to land in a lot of situations. Right now, Taric just doesn't have enough strengths to be worth playing and is a little bit too easy to play against, and a targeted stun isn't exactly the most impressive tool for a support champion to have. I'd like to see him get a little bit more utility or a little bit more options in his kit, and the boost would go a long way for people who are trying to get into the support role. Number 2 is Yorick. Here we see a champion who absolutely deserves a rework rather than a buff. Yorick is a champion who for the longest time has essentially defined what it means for a champion to be anti-fun. There's no game where Yorick creates a good gameplay experience, and because of that, Riot has actually removed Yorick entirely from the free-to-play champions rotation. His kit is essentially impossible to balance in its current state, and we are fortunate enough to be in a meta where he is underpowered, and the only thing he really has going for him is his ultimate, which I will admit is a pretty cool ability, but it's just not worth it when we take a look at the pain the rest of his kit causes. But to be fair, his kit has been weak for a long time and off meta as well, and he definitely deserves the rework based on how underplayed he's been in the last couple of years. Number 1 is Poppy. Talking about champions who deserve a rework instead of a buff, Poppy is definitely the number 1 on that list. I don't think she's ever been a popular pick in competitive play, legitimately ever, and this is a champion who was released in beta. She's definitely been the champion who has been underplayed and gone unnoticed for the longest amount of time on this list, and she only popped up in competitive play a couple times here and there, and has always been unpopular in solo queue. She's also in the same boat as Yorick, and that her kit is so unhealthy that she's been removed completely from the free-to-play champions rotation for a while now. She's just been so underpowered for such a long time and has never been given any attention at all, that I think it's safe to say that Poppy is the number 1 champion who deserves a buff or a rework in League of Legends.